What did you really learn about Billy Napier in his first year? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. It's some people have been describing it as a year zero, which is, I just think of Derek Dooley when I hear that. Not that I'm comparing Napier to Derek Dooley. No one is quite that bad, but that's just not something you're used to hearing at a prominent program like Florida. But what is your overall thoughts after just 1 year of Billy Napier's era?
Yeah, well, at least he's not wearing orange pants. I guess that's sort of the upside there. I mean, look, it was a rough year, right? I mean, Florida got to 6-4 after beating Texas A&M and beating South Carolina pretty handily, and then just fell apart against Vanderbilt, and then Florida State was able to kind of keep it close. But that game was Florida State's pretty much to win. They get destroyed in the bowl game, so you end up 6-7, and you sort of have this feeling like you did after the Oklahoma game in 2020, where it just kind of felt like everything was heading in the wrong direction. Now one thing that Napier has done is he's sort of, I would say that the way I describe year one is it's been a wait and see type approach, right? Like you can even go back and look at Emory Jones, the former quarterback there under Dan Mullen, who stayed for spring practice or at least some of spring practice before he decided to transfer to Arizona State. And I think that's what's happened is it was sort of a wait and see first year, see who was going to buy in, see who thought this was the right place to be. And then they've had pretty much a mass exodus of everybody with either 1 or 2 years worth of eligibility left, which means they're relying on very, very young players. Um, look, I think if you look at the overall recruiting for the first 2 years, it compares pretty much online with Dan Mullen. I think some of the coaching in terms of being able to get the most out of your quarterback, there's some questions last year about whether they were able to do that with Anthony Richardson. The quarterback room right now is really rough with Graham Mertz coming in as a transfer, and then you've got Jack Miller, who's a transfer last year, and Max Brown, who's a pretty low-ranked recruit coming in his first in Napier's first recruiting class. So, I mean, it's, the way I've described Napier throughout the last couple of years is that there are just questions, right? There's questions about whether he can recruit at an elite level to compete in the SEC. There's questions about whether his offense is going to work, whether he needs an offensive coordinator to help him out, or whether it's beneficial for him to have two offensive line coaches rather than being the offensive coordinator. And then the real thing that I think sort of is the thing that gives me a lot of pause is the fact that the defense took a major step back last year. With Todd Grantham leaving, the assumption was the defense was going to get better. The fact that the defense with many of the same players was just not just statistically worse, but visually and aesthetically worse as well. I think gives people pause that look, if you're not going to be able to rely on a defense that allows your offense to make some mistakes, you're going to have to be perfect. And Dan Mullen, for everything you can say about him, was a really gifted offensive play caller. Was able to get the most out of those offenses in 2018, 2019, and 2020. And the defense was what was holding him back. If the offense takes a step back and the defense is still bad, it's going to get rough real quick.
Right. And you did a really good job. I'll put a link in the description on your site, read and reaction of just kind of a little bit of the mixed messaging. Not sure what Napier is really going for here because, day one, he says, this is talent acquisition. That's what we're here for. We all know you've been well on in front of that train before it became popular. You got to have the players to win championships. Yet he also says, hey, we're not going to get into NIL bidding wars. Yet they're in the most publicized NIL bidding war. So I mean, there's kind of some mixed messaging here, and I don't believe they signed a 5-star. You could correct me if I'm wrong, which suggests, hey, they are not getting in these bidding wars because that's what it takes. What's your overall sense of that? Like I said, I know you did a big detailed breakdown. I recommend everybody go check that out to get the full picture of it. But where does that leave you with Billy Napier?
Well, I mean, I think the concern for most people, myself included, is that you look at the numbers that are being thrown around for Jaden Rashada, and you go, we probably could have had 4 or 5 stars for that amount of money. And so it's not necessarily that they're not getting into bidding wars or they are getting into bidding wars. It's that when you get into a bidding war, you got to understand the value. You got to understand when to walk away. Same thing if you're buying a car on a much lower scale, but if you're buying a car, the more information you have regarding how much it costs the dealer to bring in the car and all that sort of stuff lets you know what a fair deal is for everybody. And there are ways to get to that. I had Jaden Rashada, who's the recruit who sort of caused all the noise about the bidding wars and those sorts of things. I had Rashada somewhere between about a $300,000 to $500,000 a year player based on what the other entities have been giving out for different players. And so you're looking at $1 million to $2 million probably that you would give that guy under NIL for a career. 13 is ridiculous and 7 was ridiculous, which means that things went beyond Nick Saban always talks about process, and the process, all that really means is that you've made your decision when there's no emotion, so that when the emotion gets involved, you don't make a stupid decision because you're making the decision with the emotion sitting there at all times. That's why you prepare for everything in practice. So that when the emotion really kicks up in the game, you do what you've been trained to do rather than act emotionally. And what this sort of indicates is that there's an emotional component, at least within the collectives that are working for the program, in order to get into a bidding war that I don't think necessarily makes sense for the program overall. So I think there's concern in terms of, you have to be able to execute and bring in five-star guys. You have a limited budget to do that. Every organization has a limited budget to do that. And so if you don't value guys correctly, and that's what the Rashada thing sort of really suggests to me at a high level, is that the valuation on players is off. Then how do you properly bid? Like, what is overbidding for a player? If you have a $7 million value on Rashada, then I am leaving the guy who went to Tennessee is worth what, 22? Like, so how do you value these guys? Well, you got to understand markets. You got to understand sort of what the total pool of money is. You got to understand what's necessary to win, what positions necessary to win. You got to look at the NFL and understand, hey, look, quarterbacks make more money than left tackles for a reason, but left tackles make more than a guard for a reason, and allocate resources that way. There's a whole strategy to be able to do that. And that's the place where I get concerned. It's not relationships. Everybody who's ever met Billy Napier says he's a really genuine person. He's somebody that they get along with. I think that's a big reason why Florida was in like the top 3 or top 4 for a lot of the guys who might have decided to come to Florida. But the reality is that just because you were in the top 2 for Samson Okunlola, I mean, it's a zero-sum game. He's either playing for you or he's playing for Miami. And Okunlola chose Miami, and there was probably an opportunity there for Florida to close the deal, and they weren't able to do it.